Hello, everyone. My name is Tremaine Whitehead, and I will be presenting to you all about dietary diversity. This is for Hort 522, Professor Thompson. I want to start with a simple question for everyone to think about. How many different foods did you eat yesterday? Not just meals, but we're talking about snacks, beverages, everything. Take a moment. Would that be 5, 10, 15 even? If you're like most people, you probably may not be able to give an exact number, but you're almost certainly heard this old additive or advice, which is eat a rainbow. You've heard that. You may have heard vary your proteins, try new foods. Dietary diversity is one of the most universal recommendations in all of nutrition. Every major dietary guideline, from the USDA's MyPlate to the World Health Organization's global recommendations, encourage us to eat a wide variety of foods. But here's the problem that motivated this presentation. We actually have surprisingly little evidence about which kinds of diversity matters the most, for whom, and under what conditions. The advice to eat a variety is so broad that it creates a problem in itself. And as we'll see, sometimes it can even be counterproductive. That being said, the basic case for dietary diversity is strong. Let me give you two headlines from very recent research. First, a 2025 systematic review by Nadoff and Jabade, I hope I didn't butcher these names, introduced a concept called dietary species richness, which essentially is counting how many different biological species you eat over a given period. Think of it as biodiversity applied to your plate. And what did they find? After pooling data from multiple cohort studies, they calculated that people with the highest dietary species richness had a 37% lower risk of dying from any cause compared to those with the lowest. Let me emphasize that 37% lower. That's an effect size comparable to quitting smoking or maintaining a healthy body weight. Second, a scoping review by Han Hoffman and colleagues, also published in 2025 in the journal Advances in Nutrition, confirmed this pattern across dozens of studies. They looked at everything from food frequency questionnaires to biomarker data, and the conclusion was consistent. Higher food biodiversity, which means more different types of foods, especially from plant sources, is consistently associated with better diet quality, better health outcomes, including lower rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. So the evidence is clear. On average, people who eat more diverse diets live longer, healthier lives. But, and this is the main thing that hopefully you will pull from this presentation, not all diversity is created equal. As we'll see on the next slide, diversifying the wrong types of food groups can actually make your diet worse. And that nuance is what separates helpful dietary advice from vague, feel-good recommendations. So if diversity is generally good, why isn't the advice simply eat more of everything? Why can't we just tell people to try new foods across all food groups and let that be it? The answer comes from a pair of studies from Bolo and colleagues, one published in 2025 and actually one this year in 2026, that fundamentally changed how I thought about this topic. Here's what they did. They used micro simulation modeling. For those that were like me, unfamiliar with this topic, this means that they created a virtual population, thousands of simulated individuals with realistic dietary patterns, and then they tested what happens when you encourage them to diversify specific food groups. This allowed researchers to isolate effects in ways that would be impossible or unethical in real world experiments. And the results were very striking. And so we found that if you diversify vegetables, then the effect on the diet quality will be positive. It would improve nutrition. If you did fish, it was positive and improves nutrition. Bread and grains had a positive and modest improvement. But if you diversify with meat, the effect on the diet quality was negative. It may reduce diet quality. And if you did dairy, it was negative and may reduce diet quality. So we saw this. So they saw that diversifying meat would make your diet worse. It kind of sounds counterintuitive, right? So this is how it went down. The researchers offered a compelling mechanism. When people were told to eat a variety of meats, here's what would typically happen. They didn't swap out their existing meat for different types. Instead, they added. They kept eating their usual beef and chicken, and then they would add pork or lamb or even processed meats like sausage and bacon. This would increase their total meat intake. And what happens when you increase your total meat intake, especially processed meat? You displace other foods, vegetables, legumes, whole grains. These things that provide fiber, polyphenols, and other protective compounds. So the net effect of the diet quality is negative, even though diversity went up. And this is the key insight here that they emphasize. Vague advice to quote unquote eat a variety is not just unhelpful, it can be counterproductive. We need targeted guidance. Diversify these foods, not those, for instance. And this insight extends beyond adults. A 2026 analysis by Day, using data from over 85,000 Indian children in the National Family Health Survey, found something remarkable. Even among children who met the minimum dietary diversity threshold, meaning that they ate at least 4 of the 7 food groups, the specific combination of foods mattered enormously. Some combinations were associated with normal growth, others were associated with stunting or wasting. Simply checking the diversity box was not enough to predict nutritional outcomes. So this raises the obvious question. If the effects depend so much on which foods we diversify, what's the biological mechanism? Why does vegetable diversity help while meat diversity harms? Is there something measurable that could be happening inside the body? So far, we have established 2 things. First, dietary diversity is broadly beneficial for health and longevity. The second, but the benefits depend critically on which food groups you diversify. Plants and fish can be good for you. Excessive meat and dairy can be potentially harmful. So now we need to look inside. How does a diverse diet actually change your biology? What's the mechanism connecting the variety on your plate to outcomes like inflammation, oxidative stress, and even chronic disease risk? This is where a 2025 study by Chimera and colleagues in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition offers a compelling and evidence-based answer. They analyze the metabolic profiles, which are the complete chemical signature in blood of healthy European adults eating biodiverse diets. This is not self-reported data. This is objective biomarker measurement. They looked at hundreds of metabolites, from amino acids to lipids to phytochemicals. And they found something fascinating. People eating highly diverse diets, especially diverse plant-based diets, had significantly higher levels of polyphenol metabolites in their blood. Polyphenols may need for me to explain. Polyphenols are the naturally occurring compounds found in colorful fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices, tea, coffee, and whole grains. There are thousands of different polyphenols. You got flavonoids, phenolic acids, lignans, stilbenes, and they're one of the main reasons why plant foods are so protective. Polyphenols do two critical things inside of the body. First, they reduce inflammation. That's that chronic low-grade immune activation that we now know is a driver of almost every major chronic disease: heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, even depression. Second, they reduce oxidative stress. That is cellular damage caused by free radicals, which accelerates aging and tissue damage. So the pathway is biologically plausible and measurable. If you have more diverse plant intake, you have more diverse polyphenols, which cause lower inflammation and oxidative stress, which can lead to lower chronic disease risks. Now, related 2025 systematic review by Dion and colleagues in nutrition reviews focused specifically on plant-based dietary diversity. Not just fruit and vegetables, but also legumes, nuts, seeds, whole grains, herbs, and spices. Their conclusion aligned perfectly with the Chimera metabolic data. Diversity among plant foods was consistently associated with better health outcomes across multiple studies and populations. Importantly, this mechanism also explains why meat diversity didn't help in the BOLO study. Meat does not provide polyphenols. It provides protein, iron, and B vitamins. Now, all of those are valuable, but they are not anti-inflammatory compounds. So diversifying meat does not add protective metabolites. It just adds more saturated fat, and when you come with processed foods, more preservatives and sodium. So here we have a plausible mechanism, but here's the critical next question. Does this mechanism work the same way for everyone? Or do factors like age, income, geography, food security, and nutrition assistance programs change the equation? Mechanisms are universal. Polyphenols reduce inflammation in any human body, but people are not universal. Dietary diversity does not exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by where you live, how much money you have, what programs are available, and whether you're an infant or an adult, and even your access to clean water and sanitation. To illustrate this, we contrast two very different settings. Here in the United States, and was chosen the country of India. These are not random choices. They represent two ends of a spectrum in terms of food systems, nutrition programs, and the scale of the diversity problem. First we'll look at the United States. A 2026 WIC study published in the journal Dietetics Researchers followed over 1,200 infants enrolled in WIC, which is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children, which ranges from 5 months to 2 years of age. This is a longitudinal study, meaning they track the same children over time, which gives us much stronger evidence than a one-time snapshot. And here's what they found. With finding 1, every 1 point increase in dietary diversity between 5 and 13 months predicted a 0.3 point increase in diet quality at age 2. Now that's a modest effect. The confidence interval was between 0.15 to 0.44, so it's statistically significant, but not very big. Finding 2, WIC participants at 24 months, meaning the child was still enrolled at the program at age 2, predicted a 2.35 point increase in diet quality, and the confidence interval was between 1.29 and 3.4. That's roughly 8 times larger than the diversity effect. Then we had finding 3. The effects were additive. Children with both high early diversity and continued WIC participation had the best outcomes. Baselines plus 2.65 points. So the takeaway from this U.S. study is that programs matter. They may matter more than early education alone. WIC provides not just food vouchers, but also nutritional counseling, breastfeeding support, and referrals to healthcare. That package of services appears to drive meaningful improvements in diet quality. Now we contrast this with India. A 2025 study by Barak and colleagues in the International Journey of Health Geographics. Theirs was a much larger study. Over 63,000 children aged 6 to 23 months, drawn from India's National Family Health Survey. And the scale of the problem is entirely different. 77% of Indian children have inadequate minimum dietary diversity. That means more than 3 out of the 4 children are not getting minimally diverse diets. That's not a minority or a small number. That's the overwhelming majority of an entire generation. But the national average hides enormous geographic variation. In the central and northern states, and again, forgive me if I butcher any of these names, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Jharkhand, the adequacy rate climbs to 80 to 90%, 96%. And in some districts, virtually no children was getting minimally diverse diets. Now, they tried to find out what drove this. And then the study identified key 3 factors: maternal undernutrition. Malnourished mothers are less able to provide diverse foods to their children. And also poor sanitation. Repeated infections impair nutrient absorption and reduces the appetite. And then the 3rd factor was limited access to media and health information. Families simply did not receive guidance on feeding practices. So looking at this, we see that dietary diversity cannot be one size fits all. In the U.S., where most children have access to some food, the lever is program access and quality. In India, where many children lack access to any minimally adequate diet, the levers are poverty alleviation, sanitation infrastructure, and maternal education. So we look so far, we've had nuance, we've had mechanisms, and we have population variation. So the final question that comes up is, can we promote dietary diversity without damaging the planet? Are human health and planetary health in conflict, or can they work hand in hand? So where does that leave us? With a potential problem that I want to name explicitly. Many people assume that eating a sustainable diet, like one that is good for the planet, means eating less diversity, fewer foods, simpler plates, lower environmental impact. But a 2025 study by Burden and colleagues in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition turns that assumption on its head. And this, frankly, is the most helpful finding that I found from doing this, and I hope that you take from this presentation. And here's what they found. Biodiverse, unprocessed diets, which are diets rich in a wide variety of whole plant foods and minimally processed ingredients, achieve both of the following. It gives you higher nutrition adequacy, which means better human health outcomes, especially for micronutrients like iron, zinc, folate, and vitamin A that are commonly deficient globally, and lower environmental impact, which means less land use, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and reduced water consumption compared to heavy animal-based diets. In other words, there does not have to be a trade-off. The same diets that are good for people are good for the planet. The conflict that we've been led to believe exists between eating well and eating sustainably is mainly false when we focus on biodiverse, unprocessed foods. We must replace the vague eat a variety guidance with targeted recommendations. Tell people explicitly, diversify your vegetables, legumes, whole grains, herbs, spices, and sustainable fish. And we must not encourage diversification of processed meats, high-fat dairy, or ultra-processed snacks. The second is that we must invest in programs that work. Here in the U.S., it means fully funding and expanding WIC. And for instance, in that country in India, it means strengthening ICDS, which is Integrated Child Development Services, and addressing the structural drivers of poor diversity, sanitation, maternal education, and poverty alleviation. And then third, we must promote biodiversity in food systems, not just for conservation or ecological reasons, but for direct human health benefits. The foods that protect us against chronic disease, colorful vegetables, legumes, whole grains, fish, are often the same foods that require fewer resources to produce per unit of nutrition. Dietary diversity is not a simple prescription. It's not a eat more of everything. It's not a one-size-fit-all recommendation. But when we target it correctly, and when we diversify the right foods for the right populations through the right programs, it becomes one of the few interventions that benefit human health and planetary health simultaneously. I hope that this was informative. I hope that you got something from this, and I thank you for your attention to this.